Okay, so let's get going. Okay. Just a little bit of background info about this benchmark that we're going to present to you on hyper-casual games. So first of all, in case you don't know GameAnalytics or haven't worked with us directly, the name is very descriptive. We're a free tool that does analytics for mobile games. We have about 20 SDKs that connect to every platform imaginable. So it's very easy to put in, and we create these pre-built reports that make it very easy for both game developers and publishers, specifically hyper-casual publishers who are looking to evaluate games like Voodoo, to find core metrics and to evaluate game design and so on, and see if the game has potential to be successful. Because we've become a very popular tool over time, we now see more than 1 billion people per month in our network. And I have to say, most of our team is in London. We're about 30-something people. And the size of the network that we have is amazing to me. And actually tonight we have a bunch of people here from GameAnalytics, so if you do work with us, we have our product team, we have people from data science, from backend, from marketing, from customer operations, so we have a full house. If you need any help or there's any question that you have, somebody from GA can answer it. This benchmark, so continuing on with that, was made across a year, so from around the first part of last year to this year. It captures in total about 3 billion players overall that we've seen for this entire period. We look specifically at the arcade genre, and I'm going to explain that in a minute. So there is no hyper-casual App Store category. But when we look at our game portfolio, first of all, we know what the hyper-casual games are because they're usually at the top. The successful ones are at the top of the charts. So they are outliers, and they're most often in the arcade category. Sometimes we see them also in the casual category. The category that most behaves like hyper-casual games that we look at is arcade. So that's why you're going to see that although we can't identify every possible hyper-casual game in our network, we treat kind of arcade as a segue to the metrics of a hyper-casual game. So we're going to look at arcade as a genre. We're also going to look at casual and the industry as a whole. Okay, so moving on with the KPIs of great mobile games in hyper-casual. So this is an interesting one because this is DAU, daily active users. And the reason this is interesting is because arcade is like so far apart from everything else that to be a top performing arcade game, you now need about 100,000 DAU. And a top performing is top 15%. It's not like top 5%, it's top 15%. So it's like it's a Pareto distribution, right? What we see now, actually, kind of fun fact in the GameAnalytics network is that you can be a successful hyper-casual game, be at the top of the App Store in the US right now, and not even be in the GameAnalytics top 20, like where we see actually the most popular hyper-casual games because of geographic distribution, because some games are successful over time and so on. But arcade is like absolutely massive in terms of how much traffic you actually need to be a performing game. And this also obviously affects the amount of players that you need to rank, right? So this is the most important impact is you need to buy a lot of players to actually rank as a free-to-play game, and that's obviously where a publisher would come in, where if you're self-publishing a hyper-casual game, it's going to be very hard to get that exposure. It's going to be very hard to get your game in the rankings because what it takes to be in the top 15% is like 100,000 players a day, which is already like massive for a small game. Secondly, the difference between poor performing games, right, and high performing games is much larger for arcade than for other genres. So it's generally 5 to 10 times. But for which regularly we would have the 10x effect, right? You have the 10x effect in like engineering. Oh, 10xers, people who the 20% of people who are 10 times more performant than everybody else. But in arcade, it's like 15 times more. So definitely the gap between what it is to have a great game and what it is to have a shitty game is much larger than it is in other genres. But the interesting thing is that casual games are actually up in traffic over time compared to last year. And I personally attribute this to some hyper-casual games being classed as casual. Potentially some hyper-casual games introducing casual features and also adding kind of casual as a category. But the other interesting thing is to correlate to this is that here you see that arcade games are actually down. So although they're very competitive, they're technically, on average, they're not as competitive as they used to be, but or in traffic. But the way I explain this is that we have seen in the past year an abundance of hyper-casual games coming up. And we definitely, with kind of volume, there comes a decrease in quality. And I think that this is what we're seeing here. The fact that with more people producing hyper-casual games, the traffic is distributed amongst more people, but also that there are more games that are not doing as well simply because there are just more games, period. I think this really reflects kind of the popularity of the market. And you really start to see this is interesting in November, December. And then it gets a little bit better around here, but literally this would be like people preparing and launching games before the holiday period. Okay, but still, kind of to put that into context, compared to everything else, even the average arcade game is 2 to 3 times better than the average hyper-casual game. So still, decreasing, but still doing really well overall. And another interesting thing is this is the median. So we use the median in these reports because the median is the value that is in the middle of like a group of values. So if we use an average, games that have really high traffic would skew the overall numbers. But when we use the median, it just gives you like half of games are above this, half are under, right? And this means that literally half of all our hyper-casual games are above 30,000 DAO, which that is unusual in reference to other genres, right? There are people, it used to be that people who got to 50,000 DAO with their studio were starting to, the ad networks were starting to notice them, they were starting to make it a little bit of money, whereas now that's become it's the least you have to do, right? Okay, moving on, sorry, it's actually, I should be pointing that way. No, oh, okay. I don't know what's happening. Oh, okay, cool. So obviously we want to look at, but is DAO all that matters? Obviously DAO is related to revenue, but also session time and amount of sessions are also related to revenue and the popularity of the game. And of course, kind of in absolute number, this is absolute number of sessions, and it's perhaps not necessarily kind of the metric to look at. But the reason that I like it is because you can see kind of both. You can kind of infer average sessions per user from it anyway. And it also gives you a view of the scale. So still, arcade absolutely killing it. Much more sessions than everybody else. I think it's 167 sessions per year. So 460,000 sessions per day for the top 15% of games. And that's still even though compared to everybody else, they still have 10% more sessions per player than genres like casual and the overall industry. So it's a lot more people play, and they actually play more sessions in general. They play more sessions by about 10%, but actually in total playtime in the world, this amounts to quite a lot. Like people play hyper-casual games more than many other genres combined. And this is interesting, this is session time, right? And this is when inside this kind of starts to get, in session time, arcade is the second worst. So it's literally 19 out of 20. It's outperformed by the industry twice. So kind of, we're gonna look at the average session time next. And this is kind of what you'd expect, like, okay, people play a lot of sessions, but they're snackable. They play when they're waiting for the elevator or when they're on the tube or stuff like that. But that does mean it has some of the worst session times ever. This also means that when you compare hyper-casual games, you really need to compare them and respect these metrics to other hyper-casual games. You can't just compare them to the average mobile game because the results may be very different. If you're looking at amount of users, if you're using IEP monetization, you're probably going to have fewer users, and they're probably going to make higher transactions, for instance. But with hyper-casual, you have ad revenue, low margins, and you really need the volume of players to get to volume of revenue. And you're also going to see this really short session time, right? So it may be that you hear about the session time, and we're going to go into that, and you're going to hear that, oh, it's 6:42, which actually, personally, I think that for a hyper-casual game is just right. It's like just under 10 minutes. This is actually, 6:42 is the median. So great games will have, top-performing games will have more than that. They will have like about 12 minutes, something like that. So it is important to know this stuff. I'm going to move to the side so you can take pictures. But we also, do we have this on our website, Che? We don't share this on our website, do we?
Not specifically.
we share benchmarks on our website, so you're going to find arcade amongst other genres. But we haven't shared this specifically. But if you want, we can definitely share this presentation with you. So don't feel like you have to take pictures of the slides. Just drop a comment in the Meetup channel, or we can post it to just everybody in the Meetup group, so you can have these stats. And what we see here, by the way, is that casual kind of outperforms the industry. So it may be one interesting conclusion that I take from that is that if you start to kind of casualize your game, to introduce some mechanics which are more casual specific to a hyper-casual game, it may be that increases session time quite a lot, and that may help you kind of show more ads, get more, increase your LTV per player, while still, maintaining that kind of high volume, high traffic mechanic, because the two are quite far apart in relation to this metric. So okay, just to summarize what we learned until now. So hyper-casual is very different than the rest of the industry, and very different from casual. Casual games are growing, so we are seeing kind of a trend in this kind of either mixed hyper-casual with some casual features, or just pure play casual. But it's definitely really hard to compete in hyper-casual because you need a high volume of players to rank and to compete. And to kind of talk about then what you need to actually get published, or to get to the point where it's worth buying these players, we're going to talk about retention next. Goody. So this is day one retention. I speak about day one retention a lot, like literally every conference that I speak about, we mention day one retention at some point. At first glance, this kind of just bears out, just industry knowledge. Oh, it needs to be over 40%, right? Like there's nothing that special there. Arcade is actually in the top 5, so it's interesting compared to session length, where it's one of the worst. This is actually, it goes back into the top 5 in terms of retention, so you need to have highly engaged players. What I would tell you from kind of my own knowledge of doing a lot of these benchmarks is retention day one is the metric that yields the most false positives. So the median for retention day one is usually right in the middle of the group of games. So it's literally that half of games will do better and half of games will do worse. Whereas what we normally see is that obviously there are some games that do a lot better. So if we would see the median or more games, how do I explain this? We would see the median be closer to the bottom of the value. So between, if the range of retentions is from 30 to 42, like 60% is great retention and 30% is terrible retention, and the median is, let's say, 45%, then that means usually that the population is equally distributed. And that's actually a terrible, thing, because it means that you're not spotting some games who are going to do terrible in the long term look like they're doing great in the short term. They have great day one retention, but by day 7, and we're going to see this, by day 7 that actually changes. I'm actually going to go a bit up ahead for this one. Okay, so you'll see that this is day 1, and by day 7 we drop sharply. And it's very important to remember that if you are measuring your game and you just put out your game and it's done really well and in the first 2-3 days, just wait and see. Like, don't get overly excited. Maybe don't send it to a publisher yet and go, I got great day 1 retention. Because it may be that by day 14 you've lost most of your players, and that per se, it's still a great sign. It still means that you maybe need to add more content, need to add more mechanics, probably improve some of the mechanics. Maybe players are getting bored, so it may be that there's something you can do. Like, it's not that all is lost, but you definitely want to give it some time to fine-tune your day 7 retention. And in the case of day 7 retention, some interesting things is like arcade is 15%. That's interesting because that's exactly what industry knowledge tells you. But other interesting things is that trivia and word games over here, right? these are completely kicking ass. Like these are, I think, 23%. And I think we see games in this space in like 28% and stuff like that. So we see really games here that do really well. And this here is casino and card games. Casino and card games always do well for retention, you know, gambling. People like it. Story of my life. Yeah, it's good to know that, yes, you know, kind of, and also it's good to know that what publishers tell you, generally, like you need to aim for 40%, and you need to aim for 15% day 7 retention, like that is borne out by the data. It's not that these people are just not seeing how amazing your game is, it's just that's what they need to do to be successful, and it is what it is. Secondly, I think it's interesting to also look at, the bottom of this is not that interesting, but what I would say is that most genres, especially most popular genres, are definitely above 10%. And in in retention day 1 as well, you'll see that all genres almost are above 30%. So what I would say is that if your game does not hit something like 35% retention, if you're not around here, right? And if you're not like 12% in day 7 retention, your game is probably not worth taking into consideration by a publisher, or probably even by you for a proper launch, right? Because it is what it is. You could try, you could launch it, it's just you're gonna end up spending so much on traffic that it's not gonna be profitable. So the moment you get to 35% or so day 1 retention, and let's say 12, 13% or so day 7 retention, that's when a publisher can take it and improve it, or where you can take it and see like, what can I do to this game to actually make it, push it over the line, add like a couple more percentage points, and really see if I can launch it and make this game a success. If you're not there, and if you launch at like 25%, you need to have an idea to completely overhaul the game, or you're better off just letting it go. You know, it's sad, nobody likes to hear that, but if you're 25% day 1 retention, it's a bad game. It's just, okay. Good. We're going to talk a bit about, hold on. Sorry, this clicker is not the best clicker. We're also going to talk a bit about kind of how to make the most of your players long term, because, okay, let's say you did this. I'm assuming that for most of you, this is also not your first game, right? It's like, it's not that you're just starting and this is news to you all. But at the same time, it's quite hard to know what to do with your players long term, players churn, and then what. So we're going to talk about first how to analyze these numbers and make them better over time, and secondly, literally what to do with your second and third game. So the first one is what we call make churn day moving day. So if you know they're likely to churn, you want to really, when you get to that point in your game where you know like 85% of my players will probably churn by now, try to move them to another one of your titles. Publishers are actually great at doing this, of course. And by that, and that means even if you only have one game or a couple of games, they can also move traffic from other games to you. So they can increase your LTV overall. It's harder if you only have one game to just move players between the two. So it does, laws of kind of large ecosystems really help here. The bigger the ecosystem, the more of your, even if your players churn and they may be cross-promoted to other games, but also you get players that have been cross-promoted from other games cheaply. So definitely do not underestimate that. That will help your LTV a lot. Secondly, if you're not sure exactly when your players churn and so on, we have this handy thing, like a basic cohorts feature. I call it basic, but you can actually do quite a lot with it. You can filter by game design, you can filter by every dimension possible, you can combine these things. Like I said, GameAnalytics is free, so there's no cost to you to actually get this. But doing these things, you can analyze when is it that players start to churn. Is it something in the game experience that is blocking them? What day is it that I really see a drop in churn? And you can start to use these things to your advantage. First of all, just try to introduce mechanics to keep them past these days, but also just understand where that cutoff point is, and try to make also the most of the time you have. If you know that your players are leaving after 14 days, then try to make the most money out of them in the first 14 days. While keeping this for this entire time, right? And of course, that's a balance, so you kind of don't want to show them enough ads where they're leaving. And concerningly, we did recently an analysis where we started to see this retention dropping for some genres. So don't like push them away, with your efforts to monetize them. But definitely try to maintain this balance by looking at the effects of your game design changes overall. The other thing is, obviously at GameAnalytics, we see tons of games. I would expect that we can probably do this better than you can to find the players we're about to churn. If not, that would say a lot about us, so I'm not even going to think about that. But definitely, if you need help with that, we have a great data team. They can start. We are starting to actually create products around these things, predicting which players are about to churn, helping you get segments of these players. These features are very much in limited access right now, so we only do them for specific publishers and for specific developers. If you do work with a large publisher, that is very much in your favor in this case. But definitely we try to do that and to help people increase their LTV that way, either by helping them re-engage their players or by helping them know when is the right time to move their players to another game. Yeah, that's it. Do you guys have any questions? We have a throwable microphone.
Yeah, apparently, if you can throw it and
we can't. Yeah, we can't put these close together.
Any questions?
There was a question there.
Yeah, right. Hello?
Yeah.
Right.
That's how it works.
Yeah, just curious, how do you calculate this retention in GameAnalytics? So like if I play on the first day and then don't touch my phone for 3 days, am I D1 retained?
So we use classic retention. We look essentially at who was here 3 days ago that is also here today. So we don't count you if you were here like in between.
And is it like 24 hours, or can I play it like install the game at 11 p.m. and then?
We now do UDC time. So yes, if you played like at 11 UDC and then you showed up at like 1 a.m., I think you would be counted as a returning player. But to tell you the truth, in the grand scheme of things, at these numbers, like 100,000 players per day, that doesn't really matter. I mean, not that, but that doesn't really matter.
I've seen some differences when you do the different methods, yeah, and when you're trying to get that number to 40%.
Rolling retention will definitely make a difference. So you have people that average out retention. But we don't really do that. And I think the standard way to calculate it is classic retention. What I would definitely say is that we work with a ton of hyper-casual publishers. So like you can definitely trust us. We are the standard tool for a lot of them. Questions there?
But you can catch it? Can I throw it?
Hello? Yeah, cool. So you did a lot of hyper-casual in arcade, but were a lot of those also hyper-casual in other genres too? So like hyper-casual as a mechanic can exist in other genres too, or is it all arcade?
I would say the games that, there are like racing, for instance, is a genre that may have hyper-casual games. The reason we do this for this analysis is because arcade is the genre that most kind of exemplifies what really happened to the industry in the hyper-casual genre. But I think, yes, racing games, what am I thinking of? Because we had this mentioned in the previous benchmark. Give me some time to think about it. Catch me after, because we did kind of consider this in a different analysis. So I have to remember what they are. I can actually, hold on. I just need to see a list of them. Oh yeah, puzzle. Puzzle exhibits a lot of the same behavior. Racing exhibits some of the same behavior. Sometimes sports, but that really depends. And some are also in adventure. Yeah, but arcade is the one that most represents the genre.
Hi. Of all the metrics, including these and including others that you haven't shown, is there one metric that you would ask first of any publisher, or of any developer?
Actually, we look a lot at day 7 retention, to tell you the truth. One of my favorite metrics, because that is the thing in my case, is stickiness. So stickiness is the DAU-to-MAU ratio. It shows how many people who are here today were also here in any one of the past 30 days. And the reason that I personally like stickiness is because, you know, it helps you really see out of all the people I've bought in the past 30 days and who have installed my game, actually out of the total of them, no, not that one, okay. How many people are still here today? And what we find is actually stickiness most strongly correlates with day 7 retention. That's why when we talk about it, because it's not as well known, we use day 7 retention. But the thing with stickiness is it's also sometimes a factor of it almost sometimes equals to the total of day 7 and day 20 retention as well. That's another kind of behavior it has. And the reason I like it is because it also shows, are you getting into kind of a daily pattern, into a pattern where people open your game at the weekend, for instance. Right, because stickiness will really show that, whereas day 7 retention on Wednesday will show people from, you know, past Wednesday. But stickiness will show it from like the past 7 days overall. And it really tells you if you're getting into those patterns or if the game is becoming addictive or not. So that's one that I would say you should track. It should usually actually be higher than day 7 retention. So it should be, what I would say is if you have good stickiness, if you sum up day 7 and day 28 retention, that's what I would say. Yeah. If it's better than that, if it's higher than that, it's even better, but that's kind of where you need to start seeing it as an interesting metric. Anyone else? How much time do we have? Sorry.
One more question.
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, we're just getting the box.
I have to say, I was just in Russia and I did this presentation. I got almost no question, and I was literally like, they don't love me. But then everybody else came to me after the talk to ask me various things, and like, where were you? Everybody else could have benefited from this. It was really strange. Okay, well.
Hello.
Oh, yeah, you go.
You talked about predicting churn. If I were to give you a game, how would you go about identifying the best predictors for churn in that game? And would they generally vary a lot between games, or do you tend to use the same kind of metrics between each one? And having found them, what's your favourite algorithm for applying to this?
See, I don't have a favorite algorithm. No, but what I would say is it really depends on the game and on the genre. Like if your game is similar to other games, again, if your game is like a standard tapper and whatever, we'll probably assume that it behaves kind of like a hyper-casual game. If you have this like fancy RPG, blah, then I'm an RPG gamer, but like some people really want to overdo it. And then we'll probably look at your game specifically. I would say that if that is the case, you probably don't have enough data to predict it. The other thing I would say is you have to consider that we see a lot more information than you do. We can see if those players are playing other games. So that's actually, if we see them that they're kind of engaging with your game less and engaging with another game more, we don't even need an algorithm to tell us what's happening. But generally, what we have seen works best, and our data team actually worked on this, is we use survivability analysis, because churn is a lot like life. Eventually, everybody goes away. It's a blended algorithm, so we use a combination of algorithms, like I think AdaBoost and something else, yes. But we literally, what we do is we cycle for a bunch of them, combine them, you know, do like the typical things and then tweak them a bit.
All right, cheers.
Thank you. Hey, great talk, by the way. I just want to ask, were most of these clustered, such as down to their payment behaviors, like whales and whatnot, or are they just everybody counts as one individual?
So you can have people, this is something we're analyzing now, and this is one of the things that we actually want to add to this feature that we're doing, kind of paying users. We want to launch a feature where the moment the player lands in your game, you know if they're a high-paying user, low, like maybe paying but not a lot, or never paid. Or highly engages, or is likely to be highly engaged with ads, like loves video ads, so that you know exactly how to monetize them. But I think the answer is the same. We can see them in multiple games, so we can see if they pay a lot overall, but little per game. In that case, what's relevant to you is not that they're a whale in the world, but that you know they're a minnow in your game. So yeah, we can do that as well. And we do count real world transactions separate from virtual transactions, so we can also see both of those. We can see if they like spending virtual currency, in which case, again, ads, coins, whatever, or they like doing transactions.
Thank you.
I would say Ivan is there, and he's handling this project in the GameAnalytics team. And Sarah and Ramona are also working on it over there, so if you have questions, definitely feel free to go to them afterwards. Cool. Thank you, guys.